Hello and welcome everyone to the Child Welfare Information Technology Systems Managers and Staff webinar series brought to you on behalf of the Health and Human Services Administration for Children and Families Children's Bureau. Today's webinar will include speakers from the Division of State Systems as well as contract support staff who will go over the draft CCWIS Design Requirements Self-Assessment Tool. Next slide, please. Our speakers today are Geeta Manis, who is a DSS Federal Analyst, and Jordan Panning, who's a contract support staff, and the two of them have been involved in the creation of the self-assessment tool since its beginning. We also have Nick Gomper, who is contract support staff, who is a technical background and has been involved in the creation of the tool and has participated in the pilots. We also have John Burkhard, who is contract support staff, also with a technical background, who will be involved in the process going forward and who is on hand today to help answer questions. Next slide, please. Participating in today's webinar. So attendees are encouraged to participate throughout the webinar using the Q&A icon, and you can find that at the bottom of the screen. You may submit questions at any time using that feature. Please do not use the chat. And we will have some Q&A pauses throughout the webinar, time permitting. Once today's webinar is ended, you may submit additional questions, and you may do so to the cwis.questions@acf.hhs.gov email address, or submit them to your federal analyst. And now I'll pass it on to Geeta, who will begin today's conversation with the background and disclaimer.
Thank you, Jordan. Hello, everyone. This is Geeta Manis. And could someone confirm that you can hear me first?
I can hear you.
Awesome. Thank you. So I would first, before we begin the webinar, just give you a little bit of background and history on this tool. When the CCWIS regulations came out and we were working on all of these self-assessment tools to assist the states, for you agencies to understand what we are looking at as far as the regulations are concerned and how we are going to assess meeting those regulations, we had first put out a technical bulletin to explain what modularity is, which is really the meat of the design requirements, the CCWIS design requirements. And so that paper was well received. It went out for a lot of feedback from the states. And what we learned was the big burning questions were, well, this is great. This is modularity. We see that you took it from the CMS side of the house where they had it as part of their 7 conditions. But what does that mean for a CCWIS and how are you going to assess it? So we looked at that. We went through a series of exercises, a lot of research in the industry to see how do you measure modularity? How do you look at and assess a good modular design following modular design principles? And so there were several industry papers that were out there, and we basically took as our basis something from the Department of Defense. And I'm just giving you a background, a high level one. We're going to cover all of this in a little bit more detail later. But we chose one method that provided us the basis for coming up with a way of assessing the design requirements. So taking that method from DoD, we expanded it. And that's what you're going to see today. That is what we have included in our self-assessment tool, which we will cover. Also, think of this as version 1. When we do publish this, it's going to go out for comments. We welcome your feedback. We will continue to refine the tool, but I just want you to keep that in the background that this is version 1. And I believe sometime in the summer, Teresa, my colleague, did a webinar on self-assessment tools, the review process in general, some technical assistance she provided on the review process. So this is in keeping with all of the self-assessment tools. They are voluntary. You're not required to use it, but the tool itself will give you a good idea of what we are looking at when we assess conformance to design requirements. Next slide. Oh, one more thing. If you could go back, please. When this tool will be published is a question that is a little bit up in the air right now. If we continue with regular procedures, it's going to go through some internal approvals and clearances before we can publish it. But as you're all aware, there's a new administration, so there may be delays if the process changes. Thank you. Next slide, please. So this is the overview of the webinar and what's contained in the webinar today. And we will go over the introduction of the purpose of the self-assessment tool, the purpose of this webinar. I want to walk you through the organization of the self-assessment tool itself, the draft. And in that tool, if you are familiar with previous self-assessment tools, there's typically a section in there where you fill out documentation, or that's where you document how you are meeting certain goals or requirements. So we have that type of section in this self-assessment tool as well, but we've also taken advantage of this tool to disseminate some further technical assistance on what we were thinking and how we have formulated this assessment process. When we go through the table of contents of the tool, I will take a moment to discuss with you the types of automated functions that we will review, and then some exceptions to that. So there will be some exceptions to what we review, what we will not review in your CCWIS implementation. That's what the CCWIS automated functions reviewed for design technical assistance is, that topic. And then we will introduce you to conformance indicators. This is what we are using. It is sort of, it comes from that basis of the DoD methodology for assessing modular architecture. We have conformance indicators that we have developed to help you assess your conformance. And then we also wanted to provide you with some technical assistance on the review process, because if you think about it, in the summer, we talked about the CCWIS review process, and we were looking at automated functions and more from a program and functional perspective of review. But keep in mind, very different from SACWIS days, we now have these requirements to look at your design of your implementation. So we'll talk a little bit about how that fits into the overall CCWIS review process. And then if you take the conformance indicators and you are assessing how you are meeting design requirements, you kind of want to have an idea of, okay, well, am I meeting the design requirements overall? Where are the areas that I'll need to improve? So we've developed, we call it a scoring sheet. It's really going to be an instrument that reviewers will use once they're out there doing a review of the design. But we're going to share it with you as well in this particular self-assessment tool, because it's a way for us to sort of share with you where we're going, what we're thinking. And again, keep in mind, it's version 1, so it may be refined in future versions. And we have been able to do pilot design reviews. We actually did one early on, more than 2 years ago, before we even come up with these conformance indicators. But that was helping us formulate, and realize that we did need to refine. We did need to go into a little bit more detail than just the requirement, the way it was written. So we'll share those lessons learned. And then we have the usual frequently asked questions and Q&A period. But like Jordan mentioned, we will pause in between if you do have questions, to take those questions through this webinar. Next slide, please. So the purpose of the tool, similar to all other self-assessment tools, it will allow you to determine whether you are meeting modularity goals, design goals. It is and the review process, again, shared before with you. We're not doing this, the old SACWIS, big bang final review. What we're going to try and do is be more interactive with you. So we'll have iterative reviews throughout, which means this self-assessment tool can actually be used at any time in your development lifecycle, either at the beginning of the project, during the implementation, during development, or even afterwards to verify that you have met all the goals. And again, the tool itself gives us at ACF the opportunity to share with you our preliminary work and technical assistance on this review process. Next slide, please. So this is just to remind you of the requirement, the CCWIS regulation at 45 CFR 1355.53. And the design requirements are under Part A. Part B is exceptions, and we'll talk about that. But Part A is really where the focus is. It has 4 subcategories in it, and we have actually formed our conformance indicators to coincide with each of those 4 categories. So this is just a reference slide for you. Next slide, please. The self-assessment tool itself, it's important for me to sort of walk you through think of this as the table of contents of the self-assessment tool, because I'm going to discuss some topics that may not be in the same order as they appear in the self-assessment tool. So bear with me, please. Every tool has the introduction and instructions section and an overview and background. It's information we're collecting, for instance, on the automated function itself, what it does, how it fits into the CCWIS, any dependencies it may have with other automated functions, so high-level information. But Part B, the self-assessment section, and the reason we've bold-faced it is because this is where you are providing information. This is where you are documenting how you are meeting the conformance indicators. And remember I said in 1355.53a, there were 4 parts. So these are the 4 parts. The first part of the requirement focuses on modular design. The second part focuses on the plain language that accompanies all the artifacts that are with your automated function. The third one is the value of following standards. And the fourth is the share, leverage, and reusability. I kind of think of number 4 as the litmus test on, okay, if you are been using modular design and using those principles and standards and you are documenting correctly, is it user-friendly enough to share? So, and is it reusable? So those are the 4, and I'm going to use another term, categories. We're going to call them categories of conformance indicators throughout this self-assessment tool. And we are going to walk you through some examples of conformance indicators in each of these categories. Next slide, please. So the self-assessment tool has another section called Part C for additional considerations and resources. This is also bold-faced because we've taken the opportunity of using this section to provide you with a lot more technical assistance and a way of showing you the work we've done in trying to come up with a methodology and a strategy on how to sort of give you an idea at the very end of this entire assessment of whether you are meeting the design requirements or not for that automated function. So in here, in Part C, first we've provided some additional technical assistance on Part B's conformance indicators. We're just expanding on those indicators. And then the regulation itself in 1355.53 is written for automated functions and meeting design requirements of an automated function. But if you think about it, it sort of makes sense to pay attention to the overall design of the CCWIS ecosystem following modular design and documentation in plain language and so on and so forth. So we felt there was a need to come up with some conformance indicators that would answer those types of questions at looking at the overall CCWIS. And it says under consideration, you can consider it under construction at this point. Again, when this tool is published, you are welcome to provide feedback. And those indicators, it will make more sense when we go over a couple of examples in that section as well. The CCWIS automated functions reviewed for design, technical assistance. This is something I'm going to turn to immediately after this slide, I believe, but I want to mention that it is in the self-assessment tool, and that is the discussion where we talk about what we are actually reviewing and what may be exempt from review. The draft evaluation of conformance, technical assistance review process and scoring, a whole lot in that title. That is the area where we are presenting to you our an example strategy on how we are going to sort of, I would call it we call it a final rating to give you an idea of whether you are meeting the design requirements. And then the sample scoring sheet, this is again, all of this is included in the self-assessment tool, and the sample scoring sheet really is, after we present our calculation method for that final rating, we walk you through an example on how it's used and how we come up with the score. So it really shows the math, it illustrates the math. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, in part C, where we've thrown in a lot of technical assistance for you in the self-assessment tool, there was a section where we wanted to talk about what we will review for design conformance versus what we will not be reviewing. And these are scenarios, the title says scenarios. These are scenarios of what we will review. These are some examples. You know, there's umpteen CCWIS implementations out there. There's going to be that many examples of implementation, and we'll have to look at them. We look at each of them to really figure out what parts are we reviewing, what type of CCWIS implementation are we reviewing. But here's a good example back from CCWIS days, custom code. So an entire system built, a custom system built for the agency. This would be something that we review. Something that uses maybe a COTS product, that's the second one. So a state purchases a COTS product for their CCWIS solution. There are extensions, there are configurations. So there will be pieces of that implementation that we are going to review. Again, these are discussions we'll have with you to understand what your implementation is. And then based on that, we'll be able to tell you what parts we need to review. A transfer system, well, that's pretty self-explanatory. It's still another system that needs review, but what we just want to point out here is if state A has built a system and state B decides they want it as their transfer, if state A, we found their CCWIS compliant, it doesn't mean that state B system will be CCWIS compliant or that they will conform to the design requirements. So essentially, wherever the implementation is, those are the systems that we are reviewing. And so the receiving system would also be reviewed for design conformance. And then finally, you know, different technologies out today, and whether you're using services, platform as a service, software infrastructure, whether it's hosted in-house or not on premises, you know, it's again going to depend on the various types of implementations, and we'll have those discussions and determine what parts will need to be reviewed. Next slide, please. So in the title, you see it says exemptions. And 1355.53b is where we have the requirement that says these are the types of automated functions we're not going to review. And B1 is pretty much done. This was for the transitioning CCWIS systems that had existing code that were granted exemption from design requirements. But B2 is granting an exemption based on a business case. Maybe tomorrow we're using something that's even more efficient than modular design. I don't know, you know, technology is cyclical. We're always distributing and then coming back and making it a single system. And so whatever happens in the future, if there's a better methodology, a more effective, efficient, economical way to implement these solutions, you can bring in the business case and we will discuss it. And then finally, although 1355.53b doesn't really talk about it, we have clarified in our child welfare policy manual, the link is provided specifically for a question related to COTS products and whether we are going to be reviewing the COTS product. And the answer is no. But again, caveat here, discussions with us, and you will explain the boundary around the COTS product. So any proprietary code, we're not going to review that for conformance to design requirements, but anything outside the COTS, we're going to take a look at, such as configurations or extensions. Next slide, please. So here we are about to launch into some examples of conformance indicators, and think of them as, if you are familiar with the functional self-assessment tools, Part B is organized with program goals or foundational requirements, and next to that is where you document evidence to show how you are meeting those goals. It's a similar format in Part B. And by the way, this is Part B in the tool. We have conformance indicators for each of those categories. Again, like I mentioned, we're calling them categories. So the 4 categories, each of those categories have their own conformance indicators. And I am going to turn it over to Jordan to start walking you through some examples. So we'll go through examples from each of those 4 categories. Next slide, please.
Okay, next slide, please. And oh, it appears we actually do have a few questions that we might answer at the moment. We take a look at those questions?
Yeah, I apologize. I forgot to pause.
Sure. One of them is there a list of approved SaaS systems for CCWIS? Or are providers approved on a case-by-case basis based on plans?
Do you want me to take that, Teresa?
You can take it or I can, whichever you like.
Go ahead.
There is not a list of approved SaaS systems for CCWIS, and it really is approved on a case-by-case basis based on the design of your system and the how your system is designed and how it's implemented. Did you want to add anything, Geetha?
No, and again, this goes back to even through SACWIS and CWIS, we at DSS are not going to say what products work best for you or what type of implementation works best for you. It's really you who are going to come to us and tell us what suits your needs. So we don't approve nor deny products, but you will come to us and explain the entire vision or, CWIS ecosystem that may or may not include SaaS products.
And the other question is just about the slide deck. And sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt the presentation, but basically the slide deck will go out after the presentation and the webinar. Oh, I'm sorry. The other question is, when will the slide deck be available? And it'll be available after the webinar is over. And we will also post the recording once it's 508 compliant. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
And I'm sorry, Jordan, if you could just clarify, the webinar is shared shortly after through the listserv?
Yes, once the webinar is ready, it will be posted on the website, and we will send out a notice on the listserv when it's available.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Now I'm going to discuss the conformance indicators for category 1, which is modular design. We have, as Geeta mentioned, examples in each of the, we have examples for each of the conformance indicator categories. And the examples that we've selected are representative of that category, but they're not all of the indicators for that category. The exemption or exception to that rule is for the category 2, where we're going to show you each of the best practices for that category. And show examples of the documentation that should adhere to the requirement. So the first set of examples here are the modular design ones, which you'll see we have 5 subcategories. We have 3 listed here on this slide and 2 on the next that I'll discuss before showing the examples. And you'll notice that the conformance indicator categories follow these subcategories. So the first one here is for multi-layered modular architecture. Here we'll be looking at your architecture to see if it follows an N-tier design, and we'll be looking at the presentation layer, the business logic layer, and data access layers. The next item is coupling, and at a high level, we'll be looking at whether the modules can function independent or if there are many dependencies between modules. The next item, cohesion, we'll be looking to see if your module, does a specific task. For instance, your automated function for intake is the automated function that does intake. That's the kind of thing that cohesion is going to be tracking for us. And next slide, please. Next item is for a business rules engine. We will be looking at how your business rules are constructed and executed. And the last one there, computer generated code and configuration, we'll be making sure that whatever means you're using to generate that code, that it's going to be following the design and development standards, and that it fits within the N-tier architecture of the CWIS. Next slide, please. So the first example here for a conformance indicator, you'll notice that conformance indicator I.B1.01, that is the ID number essentially of this conformance indicator. So you'll see that in each of the slides. That's what that stands for. Our first example follows for the architecture pattern. You see where the CWIS or automated function institutes an architectural pattern that incorporates an N-tier layered design or other structured topology, specifying architecture components with clear roles, responsibilities, and relationships. And you can see that that follows the subcategory that we mentioned earlier. And the typically demonstrated language here, where it says typically demonstrated in architecture and design documentation of the overall CWIS, each of the indicators has language that follows that structure, that typically demonstrated, and that is there to clarify both what we mean by the indicator and also how we'll be measuring that, or what we'll be looking for. So that's an example of an indicator. We're going to go through a few of them for modular design. So next slide, please. The next one here, we'll be tracking coupling. CWIS business rules are separated from the core programming. So this one here is measuring that modular design and to make sure that the rules are indeed separate. Typically demonstrated through design documentation that reflects how business rules are segregated into a separate layer or component. Business rules may also be independently managed and associated with a distinct business rules engine. Next slide, please. The next one here, also for coupling, automated function has been designed with clear boundaries. Again, we'll be checking to see, if there's a good, clear starting and stopping point that has been defined for the automated functions. This one typically demonstrated through design document or interface control document that details and describes the set of interfaces for the automated function. And here, and I know we'll be talking about this a little bit later on, you'll notice that several of these are demonstrated through documentation. Documentation will be a key part of the process that we'll go through, both in asking you for evidence during a self-assessment and for how we've done pilots of this process. So documentation will be key going forward. Thank you. Next slide, please. The next one here, coupling. Identified automated function is easily severable from CWIS. So, if you got those clear boundaries, we'll be measuring, can you sever, that module out from the CWIS easily? Or if it has a lot of dependencies, that may make it not so easy to sever from the CWIS. So here, this one typically demonstrated through reference to automated function installation, setup, configuration, and usage information independent of overall CWIS documentation. And the last one, next slide, please. Cohesion. This one will be tracking members from the agency and their business partners who perform the business function being supported by the automated function were given an opportunity to participate in designing the automated function. So essentially, that automated function is meant to support tasks, from users, and we'll be checking that the users had an opportunity to help define what those tasks are and how that automated function got designed. This one typically demonstrated by documenting stakeholder input to automated function design, such as through a user-centered design process. Next slide, please. Here, and you'll notice this one looks a little bit different. This is the conformance indicators for category 2. This one's plain language. And here you'll see the best practices for plain language. These correspond to conformance indicators themselves. So the best practices are know your audience, organize your thoughts, summarize main points, write short sentences and paragraphs, use everyday phrases and words, limit use or do not include any technical jargon, use strong subjects and verbs, define uncommon terms, use formatting, headings, lists, tables, and other visual cues, and proofread and edit. And those best practices come from the guidelines at plainlanguage.gov, and the address for that is listed there on the slide. Next slide, please. Here are the examples of the documentation that should adhere to the plain language requirements. So this may include automated functions documented within the automated function checklist that supports CWIS, any programs and report documentation, any programming code and supporting documentation for bidirectional data exchanges, data exchange standards documented both in program code and system documentation for bidirectional data exchanges and for data exchanges with systems, and data quality plans and data quality biennial review documents. So those are examples of documents that would be required to follow that plain language requirement. Just examples. And now I will pass on the torch to Nick Gomper, who is going to go over the categories 3 and 4.
Were there any questions on that previous section? Okay. My name is Nick Gomper. Thank you, Jordan, for passing things along. I'll introduce the 3rd and 4th CWIS design conformance categories, those derived from 1355, 53A, concerning First, development standards, and secondly, sharing, leveraging, and reusing of CWIS automated functions. As Jordan did for both modular design and plain language, I'll also walk through some representative conformance indicators for each category. Next slide. So the first of these, category 3, pertains to development standards. And this relates to the third item pertaining to the adherence to a state, tribal, or industry defined standard that promotes efficient, economical, and effective development of automated functions and produces reliable systems. So effectively, what that conformance indicator overall is looking for, that category, is looking for documentation of standards and how they're used and adhered to, as well as how those standards lead to efficiency, economy, and effectiveness, as well as reliable systems. Overall, we're looking for the submission of written documentation of standards. Those can be done as documentations or links on the web, and they can include both project standards as well as standards used by purchased software. To demonstrate efficiency, economy, and effectiveness, we're looking for the standard that supports efficient, economical, and effective development of the CWIS, which does not hinder the project team during implementation and enhancements. Next slide. The first of the representative indicators, Conformance Indicator IB301. This one pertains to adherence to standards and reads that the agency developed and conducted a process for evaluating adherence to design and development standards. The key here is that it's not enough to have a set of standards. The state should demonstrate automated function adherence to the standards, and doing that effectively requires a process. So this is typically demonstrated by identifying leverage design and development standards and the agency's process of review. So a state would be demonstrate strong performance on this indicator by showing a mature evaluation process. Next slide. The second representative example is, again, applies to adherence to standards. In this case, the agency confirms adherence to design and development standards during internal project and code reviews. So the focus here is on the project and code reviews and the effectiveness of those. And it's typically demonstrated through internal project and code review minutes, logs, associated version control repositories, and such that show the changes made to adhere to standards. So if there's a review and the standards or the code is reviewed against those standards, the type of thing that should be seen is alterations to ensure adherence. And again, the state would show strong performance when the reviews consistently and effectively evaluate adherence to standards. Next slide. The third representative example pertains to written documentation of standards. The agency maintains written documentation of the software development standards used for automated functions designed for the CWIS. The key here is that implementation teams and reviewers need ready access to standards. And because standards continually change, it's important to maintain and keep up with standards. This conformance indicator is typically demonstrated through reference to standards documentation, and strong performance is reflected in comprehensive documentation. Next slide. The next example, also pertaining to written documentation of standards, indicates that standards used for automated functions are based on state, tribal, and/or industry-defined standards. And this is pulled right from 1355, 53A3, which dictates adherence to a state, tribal, or industry-defined standard. It's typically demonstrated by referencing leverage standards pertaining to the development of reusable CWIS automated functions and the association with state, tribal, and/or industry standards. Next slide. Conformance Indicator IB 310, again, pertaining to written documentation of standards. The agency maintains written documentation of the standards on the use of commercial off-the-shelf or software as a service automated functions, if applicable. So in this particular case, it provides the implementation team with information on leveraged COTS, that's commercial off-the-shelf, or SaaS, software as a service standards, and indicates where they may differ from state, tribe, and territory and/or industry standards. And the key here is to have those standards documented to potentially support interoperability and broad understanding of the standards leverage. And this is typically demonstrated by identifying leverage development standards and the agency's process of review. Strong performance, again, is indicated by maintaining standards for all applicable COTS or SaaS components. Next slide. So moving along to category 4, this one pertains to the sharing, leveraging, and reusing of the CWIS automated functions. So breaking those out into the 3 aspects. To share, we have included metadata information, and this will can identify and describe the automated function for potential recipients. We also look at policy and procedure management. This information can show how the automated function is managed and maintained. We're also looking for a clear and unique purpose to the automated function to make the potential need for it easily understandable to potential recipients. Jordan mentioned severability before, and that's obviously a key part of sharing. It needs to be able to be pulled out from the overall CWIS so that it can be effectively shared. And then we also like to see demonstrated testing and test coverage of the automated component to show that the automated function can be used with known levels of quality and reduced risk. In terms of leveraging the automated function, we're looking for clear requirements and other documentation to facilitate use of the automated function. Evidence the automated function addresses security and compliance, and additional system requirements, installation, integration, configuration, and administration procedures to allow the recipient of the automated function to effectively use it, so they're not left on their own to try to work through how the component can be used. Finally, we're also looking at reuse of the automated function. So we're looking at, for example, use of standard frameworks that fit into a broader application framework for consistency and interoperability, as well as the use of standard design patterns within the automated function for consistency with best practices and maintainability. Now I'll walk through some of the examples from this category. Next slide. So the first of these pertains to sharing and says that product status, version information, and release notes for the automated function are provided. The idea of this is to provide recipients with information on new features, bug fixes, etc. It provides overall context. and it's typically demonstrated through reference to automated function product and release information. Strong performance here, would be that the status version and release notes are fully and clearly specified along with the delivered product. Next slide. This one also pertains to sharing and indicates that a product README and links to more comprehensive documentation for the automated function are provided. The idea behind the README is that it should provide an overview of the automated function's purpose, architecture, design, system requirements, installation, and configuration. So a broad overview of how to, what the product is about and how to leverage it. It might include also links to various artifacts like system design documentation, user guides, etc. And this is overall typically demonstrated through reference to automated function READMEs or similar documentation. Next slide. Another one pertaining to sharing. This automated function is accompanied by information describing the process and plans for maintaining, updating, and ending support for code. The idea behind this conformance indicator is that it provides recipients with insight into the future development of the automated function, including any new versions and features or, conversely, end-of-life decisions for the function. And this is typically demonstrated through reference to automated function product roadmaps, which should ideally have comprehensive planning information provided along with it. Next slide. Again, applying to sharing. For this conformance indicator, an issue queue is available to view and track progress on known bugs, enhancement requests, and other issues. The idea here is to provide recipients of the automated function insight into outstanding issues and the status of potential enhancements. And it's typically demonstrated by referencing the associated issue tracking system and explaining how access to that system or regular reports from the issue tracking system are made available. Strong performance here, and would have the detailed issue tracking system available for the automated function. Next slide. This conformance indicator pertains to leveraging the automated function, and it indicates that the automated function is accompanied by a software installation plan, also known as a SIP, or similar documentation detailing system requirements and installation procedures. The idea is to provide recipients with an understanding of the automated function as a discrete installable component and how it is installed to complement the overall CCWIS. So it's typically demonstrated through reference to a SIP or similar documentation. Next slide. So that completes the overview of both the standards and the sharing, leveraging, and reusing categories. If there are no questions, I'll hand it back over to Geeta to discuss the overall conformance indicators.
So I'd like to do a couple things. There's a question that's been hanging out for a bit here that I see. I don't see it anymore in the Q&A. So does someone have the question from the person raising their hand?
Yes, it's from Andrea.
Okay.
And the question is, if a state is using a platform as a service to speed delivery and maximize configurability, would sharing design specifications, such as domain models and configuration metadata files, provided that the metadata is organized modularly, meet the reuse requirement?
I think those artifacts were included in, what would be needed for sharing to provide appropriate documentation. There are certainly documents that we require that you will find under Category 4 in the conformance indicators, but also it's not all of what is needed. So it is part of what is needed, but not all of what is needed. Nick, is there anything to add to that question? Do you have anything?
I understood the question right. I'm thinking that one of the keys there is to understand if it's a distributed system for that automated function, what are the data flows, what are the dependencies of that particular automated function, and those things need to be determined, less so the internals of the platform as a service.
Rush, could we open Andrea Holland's line and just see if that answered her question or if she has follow-up questions?
Andrea, your line is open.
Hey, Teresa, this is Manny from Andrea's team. And just to extend that question, it is regarding the category 2, multi-layer modular architecture. And it clarified like, okay, it should be in the typically presentation layer and service and data layers separate. What I would like to present here, like we are going to use like a software as a service, that product itself designed in that way. So how this going to happen with this week's review? Because it's allow that model to support only. So if you use like, for example, Salesforce as a service, it designed in that way, like the presentation layer always keeping separate on the UI and the business logic always remains separate. That's the way that product is designed. So if we customize, we'll follow that same standard framework. So is it like we need any kind of exception at the beginning, like, hey, as we're using this software and it support this multi-layer modular architecture, so during the project lifeline, we'll not come up with further review. So is that something which defined, or what is the process for any other SaaS products?
So Geeta, can I take a shot at answering that?
Yes.
So one of the things I think you'd have to think about is if you're defining specific automated functions, how are those implemented in the context of your SaaS, right? Are they independent? Can they be extracted and shared with others? Or is it are you using the SaaS in a monolithic way so nothing really can be pulled out?
And with regard to sharing, like extracted and shared with others, I
Right.
assume like you are referring.
That's certainly a key thing. It pertains again to the severability of it.
Mhm.
I also think there's obviously a COTS/SaaS exception to some degree, but we want to see how the automated functions are implemented in that context.
Mhm. And when you say like it can be shared, that means like if that automated function is like export, and if I want to share, anyone who using that product, like for example, SaaS product, they can like import in their system and can use, correct, right? It's not like technological independency. I'm just referring like you can export.
Right. That's the idea, right? So
Okay.
that if you define an automated function, that if somebody else is using the same SaaS platform, they should be able to pull in. You can maybe export your configuration, and they can pull that back in to use within their system, providing they have the other dependencies configured correctly.
Thanks. And just last question from me on extending, like regarding the coupling, the business rules we're planning like to keep separate, but still there are certain class of business rules which we are looking for to embed in the inside the product, because keeping outside in the business rule may be quite expensive, or it's need like more customization than keeping in the product itself. So do you think like, yeah, please go ahead.
The business rules can be within the product. I think the key is that they be established in some sort of separate layer. Whether it's a collection of rules that are processed together, the idea being that they're just not scattered all over your business code.
I see. Got it. Thank you.
Yep.
Are there other questions in the queue?
No, we have no further questions.
Okay, so I'm going to switch things around a little because of this scintillating material we've been getting through. I know that we have everybody's undivided attention. I thought it might we might switch gears a little. And Dave, if you could switch over to slide 45, we will come back and cover the rest of the material. But if we could just move to slide 45 for a second. I want to jump into the demo of the scoring sheet. So we will go back and cover the rest of the slides and the technical assistance provided in the self-assessment tool. But I figured since we've been talking about examples of the 4 categories of conformance indicators that we are, assessing and evaluating, that I thought it'd be a good idea to share with you right now this spreadsheet. It's an Excel spreadsheet that we will be using, or we can use to kind of document what we see when we are doing a review, what we determine based on the documentation you may have provided in advance, and virtual reviews, for instance, of the automated function, and then the code review. We would be requesting the code, but based on all of that information, this is the spreadsheet that we will use that is based on MOSA, which is from that Department of Defense methodology for modular architectures. We took that, there were some really good conformance indicators in there, but we didn't think they were, kind of fleshed out enough. So we created some more conformance indicators, some more detail, which is why, although you saw 5 examples from each category, there's really about 10 to 20 conformance indicators for each of those categories. And then we also shared them through pilot reviews and refined them further. And then another thing we discovered, through this process over the last couple of years, is that it wasn't simple enough to sort of say, okay, here's a conformance indicator, here's the evidence, it's a yes or no. It wasn't sufficient to just make it a black and white yes or no. So we've actually got some scores that we assign to the conformance indicators, ranging from 0 to 3. You'll see that in a minute. And in addition to that, not all conformance indicators are alike. We figured there were some that were in the categories that were more, that had more weight than the others. So we've actually, ACF has assigned weights to those conformance indicators in those categories. And Dave, if you could jump to the main sheet. Okay. So I'm just going to make this a full screen for myself. Here you see in column 1, the item number, those are the conformance indicators. If you look at the bottom, the tab is category 1. So here we are looking at a list of conformance indicators in our category 1 that we've developed. Could you scroll down to see how many there are? Yeah, so they're going to be anywhere from 10 to 20. So if we could go back all the way to the top again. The subcategory is just part of what we are providing you to assist you in seeing the different types of conformance indicators and where they actually fit in. For instance, this is for the modular design. And if you look at column C, this is the actual indicator. Column E, let's go ahead and unhide column D for a second. So picture this as the tool that a reviewer will be using when they are, out doing a review of the design. And there are some helpful notes to the reviewers to help them sort of understand what they may need to look for. These are based on lessons learned. These are based on technical expertise, for instance, from Nick on our team that have been provided. And keep in mind these reviews, it wasn't mentioned in this one, but it was mentioned in the review process. We will not be really going out and saying, okay, we're going to review every single automated function in the CCWIS. We're going to actually have to pick and choose. We'll select and we will talk to the state. We're all going to collectively select which ones that we're going to look at. So there will be, we're building capacity on our end. We're also going to be strained in trying to make sure, that we can go out on all of these reviews and do all of these reviews. So these notes to reviewers will help us all as a team And these notes reviewers, I believe, will continue to grow for each of these conformance indicators. If you notice, we're looking at category 1, there's also category 2, category 3, category 4. So each one of those has their conformance indicators. Okay, if we slide over to column E, this is the assigned weight. So this is going to be standard for everybody, everybody meaning any CWIS automated function that we review. These are weights that we have assigned based on extensive analysis of each of these indicators to see, what we want to assign. I think the weights are anywhere from 1 to 3. And then assessment guidelines, again, more guidelines on, can we move over to the next columns, please? The assessment guidelines are for the reviewer to assign an assessment score in column G. So we'll be looking at the indicator, we will have the documentation, we will have had your self-assessment, either in a self-assessment tool format or other formats, information through APDs, but based on all of that, we'll be able to assign an assessment score. And then columns H and I are really just to help with the math. So you don't need to worry about that right now. And then as we scroll further, observations during review, this is what the reviewer can use to document any comments, observations, because again, keep in mind, as previous reviews, we may do reviews, but we do need to go back and sort of look at all of the information and decide, do we all really see the same thing? Are there areas that need clarification? So we can probably document them here. And we wanted to design the spreadsheet so that it could be a conversation with the agency. So we may have our observations here. We may say things like, this needs clarification. We may have documented something which the agency may say is actually, that's inaccurate. Maybe we misinterpreted something. So we could fill this out, we would send it back to the agency, and we've actually piloted this. And the agency can document additional comments, and the conversation may continue for a while. The conversation doesn't necessarily have to continue in this spreadsheet, but so far it's worked for us where we've had comments and we've had CB response. And then if we could just go to the method tab. This is actually documented in the self-assessment tool in that part C technical assistance section or additional considerations. So this breaks down the math, the methodology that we're using. And what I'd like you to see here is the final rating scale that you see in the middle. Our whole purpose is to try to come up with a reasonable measure of compliance with design requirements. And even in the final rating, remember, we said that there was no yes, no answer to the conformance indicators. In a similar fashion, there's no pass fail. So what we have are ranges of conformance. And if you see anything above 72 is satisfactory and or exemplary. And that is the number that we want to come up with. So let's go to the example sheet. So here's an example, and just for illustration purposes, we don't have all the indicators in here. We only have the 5 from the 5 examples we gave for categories 1, 3, and 4, and 5 from the plain language. So we're going to plug in some sample data. We'll say that we were there for a review and we're entering the scores for each of those conformance indicators. We would also put in some comments to sort of back up what we are assessing here in the observations. So I'm just going to let Dave go ahead and put in some information here. So you see in plain language, these are perfect scores. 3 is the highest. So it looks like, wow, they're doing great with their plain language. And category 3, design standards. 3 is again the highest score, and they're getting like all 3s in the assessment. Category 4, this is the share, reuse, leveraging. And here we see that there might be some issues. And again, this would be a conversation back and forth. There would be improvements that the state would make. And so if we go, what was category 1, by the way? The scores in there. Okay, so we didn't have perfect scores here either. We have some areas that possibly need improvement. But we give the breakdown of the assessment guidelines as well. What do these scores mean, 0 to 3? Okay, let's go to the final tab and see what happened. So the final tab has macros loaded into calculation in here. And what Dave had plugged in, if you'll notice, is what is in column B. So the 0.61 for category 1, you actually see reflected on that category 1 page as well. It'll show up at the bottom of that tab, the category 1 tab. But for each of those categories, you notice there's a 61%, 100%, 100%, 40%. But what I haven't told you yet is, while we had weights associated with each of those conformance indicators in each of those categories, we also have weights associated with the categories. And this too was something that we went through a lot in analyzing and trying to figure out, what makes sense. And in our conclusion, we have determined that, the whole leverage, reuse, share, and following the module principles weigh more than the plain language and the design standard conformance indicators. And that's why you see in column C, for category 1 and category 4, they're worth 30% of the whole score each. So based on those weights, in column E and F, or D and F at the bottom, is the final score that you see for this evaluation. And what does the 70 translate to? It translates to needs of work. And really, if you are familiar with CCWIS days, we used to have action plans. It's the same sort of thing. We want to make sure that we are continuing to improve. And as far as design is concerned, one of the risks with design is, if you don't catch us fast enough, and there are some, make or break type issues, that can cause a lot of problems in moving forward with your implementation. So design requirements, design reviews, it's a really good example of engaging, early on with your analyst and start talking about, the modularity of the system and any documentation you may have that you can share very early on, so that we can start looking at it, providing technical assistance as needed in areas that may be of concern. But this is the spreadsheet, and I don't know if there are any questions that have been coming up as we've been going through this. I hope we didn't go too fast, but I thought I might wake folks up rather than from on about slides.
One of the questions, Geetha, is how do folks get a copy of the spreadsheet? And so I had advised them, I think, that they would get that from their analyst by making the request. Is that what you were planning on doing?
Yeah, what we want to do though is okay, just a caveat, please keep it within the state. Please do not share with any vendor staff. Please understand that none of this is approved and it is draft. We are more than willing to share with you, and always remember, this is version 1. We are still refining. So we are happy to share it, but yes, as Teresa said, please ask your analyst.
Okay, we have one more question. State determines that typical case management modules, such as intake, are too large. That is, they comprise many different tasks in a range of contexts. We assume it would be acceptable to define smaller, finer-grained automated functions, provided that they are clearly separated by well-defined business events. We would be interested in how other states are using smaller and/or shared services, conduct person search, make placement match, conduct risk management, risk assessment, for example, and how they are approaching and meeting design requirements.
Definitely, we encourage, communication with other states, and we'll be happy to help you get in touch with them. Remember, we have our listservs. You are always welcome to ask each other's questions. The way the listserv works is you pose the question and you will receive answers directly from other states. As far as automated functions, it is really, again, up to you to define the boundaries of an automated function as you listed on your automated function checklist. That's not to say that if you find there are sub modules within an automated function that you believe could be their own standalone automated function. In a checklist, you can have a high level function and you can break it out into subcategories. But again, keep in mind the principles of the design requirements apply to an automated function, what you define as an automated function. So maybe in the case of the person who asked the question, it makes sense to break it down a little bit more, make it more granular. It may be the opposite for another state where it makes more sense for them to group smaller modules together to say that a larger one is the automated function and that's how it's shareable.
Thank you. I don't see other open questions, Geeta.
Okay.
Hi, we have a hand raised, Margaret.
Is somebody trying to ask a question?
I think the raised hand went away, so it may no longer be relevant.
Okay. All right, then with that, can we go back to slide 36? All right. The conformance indicators we have talked about so far are the ones in part B, and those are the ones that we are assessing. And again, I have mentioned that we will not be reviewing every single automated function in a CWIS implementation. Having said that, there's also the idea, while these requirements are written for an automated function and the conformance to design for the automated function, we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that the entire CWIS really should provide a platform that is conducive to developing modular functions. And if we go on to the next slide, please. So in order to tackle that, because it just, you know, if we're looking at maybe a subset of automated functions in a CWIS, we don't want to lose sight of, okay, well, is the entire CWIS ecosystem really, you know, maximizing the use of modularity and following modularity principles? So we tried to come up with some conformance indicators that right now we're not really, we haven't completed how we're going to monitor these, how we're going to assess them, if we are going to assess them with a score, or perhaps these are indicators that we need to be aware of as we are reviewing. And a lot of it may be covered with overall CWIS documentation that we may be receiving on technical architecture and all of those technical documents we may need in advance. So it might help if let's go on to the next slide. There's just a couple of examples we've brought here, and they may sound kind of duplicative, but again, it's really the idea of making sure we don't lose sight of the entire CWIS as a whole and the CWIS following the design requirements. So here's one that says the design approach adheres to establish data standards to facilitate the integration of all modules in the CWIS. So here's where the module principles would, you know, as long as you're following it for the entire development of that CWIS, and you had been using them in the automated functions, hopefully that means you are using it consistently throughout your implementation. Next slide. Every automated function integrates into the overall CWIS. So again, remember, we may be spot checking certain automated functions, but we need to make sure that all of them are integrated in the overall CWIS. The next slide. And one reason for modular design and our design requirements was really to promote the efficiency and reusability. We've talked about reusability and sharing. That's a great value of modules, where you can kind of pick something out and share it with someone else who has a similar platform. Part of, you know, our reasoning for having CSWAP as also as a repository to allow states to share automated functions. But the other side of it also is to effectively and efficiently and economically maintain an existing system, because you know that program and policy in human services changes frequently, and we want to make sure that that type of maintenance and change can be incorporated into the CWIS, and modularity does foster that type of environment for development. And next slide. And I think we mentioned this even at the automated function level, but CWIS has a consistent user experience throughout all of its modules. Next slide. Okay, and again, part C of that document of the self-assessment tool provides you with the technical assistance. Next slide, please. That has that scoring sheet we just went through. But we also talk a little bit about the logistics of what happens, what could, you know, how are we going to conduct these reviews, and what is the documentation that could be shared in advance, who's involved in these activities, and what to expect after the review. So next slide, please. This is just a list of the documentation that we would, you know, it's valuable to us to probably collect in advance. If we have time, we're going to cover some of the lessons learned, but what we've learned from pilot reviews is that, you know, one of the first and second that we did, we scheduled a review and we were preparing for the review. Maybe 4 to 5 weeks prior, we were asking for certain documentation. We've actually found there's certain documentation that should be sent to us up front, even before we've gotten, you know, something on the schedule for a review. So these are the types of documents. Share with your analysts. A lot of times we're already receiving this information from you on our monthly calls, or, you know, in between calls, or through APDs. But this type of information is important even in the design review. And then later on, as we're getting close, or as you're getting close to actually finalizing your automated function and you think it's packaged right, we're going to ask you for the code so that we can review the code, and we will review the code in advance, which is helpful, so that when we actually come out for the review and then you do the demo, our technologists who will be assisting us in these reviews will be able to ask questions because they will have already looked at the code as well. Next slide, please. We went through this one. Next slide. So, like I said, it's taken us years to develop this. Early on, we were doing very high level, rudimentary, you might say, assessments of design, and, you know, those experiences and feedback from the state when we were doing that is what led us to conformance indicators. And we continue to refine with pilot reviews, and you are welcome to request a technical assistance, you know, design review. We have, I think, 2 or 3 at least that are already in progress right now, 2 or 3 that were completed. Some lessons learned. It's important for you to identify automated functions for review that you have listed and confirmed on your automated function checklist. And the reason being because those are the ones that are also tied to CSWAP requirements. And we want to be able to monitor and review and evaluate design requirements by also, remember I said it was a litmus test, the whole idea of sharing, leveraging, reusing. One of the ways is for you to show us that you can package it to share it on CSWAP upon request. And there is a technical assistance or checklist or a guideline on the CSWAP website that walks you through the pieces of information that are needed in order to package and share an automated function on CSWAP. And I think it's worth looking at. So if you don't already have an account on CSWAP, please reach out to us and have the login account created, and then you can also see that checklist. Overall, CWIS should promote modular design. That's that thing we're keeping in the back of our minds. We're still formulating how we want to monitor it, and that's why it's included in technical assistance, not necessarily criteria that we'd be evaluating in Part B. And share documentation early. We've shared a couple of lists of documentation in here. A lot of that, if it can come early as possible with enough lead time before the review, the better. So these are some very easy questions to answer. When we schedule a pilot review, again, just speak with your analyst, and there's more lead time we can have before the review, because again, a reminder, we have resources here, the technologists who can do it, but you know, it'll be kind of tough if they have too many at the same time. So it would be optimal for us to parse it out through the year. So the sooner you can kind of discuss it with us, that you're interested, you know what automated function, the better. When will this tool be finalized? I mentioned that up front. You know, if everything goes the way it normally does, we should be able to have it go through clearances and then published. But if there are any changes because of the new administration, you know, we'll keep you updated. And yes, this webinar is recorded. I will turn it over to Jordan or Dave.
Yeah. I suppose, are there any final questions? This will be the final Q&A session.
There are none that have been written, so there are none that are in the queue.
Looks like someone has their hand raised.
Yeah, and it looks like I just received a question as well. How do we know who our analyst is?
Well, your analyst would be the analyst at DSS, and our assignments are all actually on our home page for each state.
Hi, Gita, this is Nick. I can post the link to the analyst assignments in the chat for folks to click on
Perfect.
and reference quickly.
Okay, so you will have the list shortly in chat. Was that the same as the hand raise?
There's many from Andrea's team. I have two questions. Like one is like regarding conformance indicator, and this question for the Nick. So it's like state's responsibility for creating the standard document, because I believe like the reviewer will just verify like whether it's as per the standard or not. And the same way, that's a state's responsibility of baseline for the code review, and reviewer will verify like whether those parameters matching or not. Is that correct assumption?
So if I understood your question, you're asking, do you need to create those or can you reference it? You can certainly reference, you know, state, tribe, or industry standards, and there's certainly a wide range of community and industry standards that are relevant for development. So you can reference those. The key is during code reviews and similar processes, if you're leveraging those standards in your review, and you're able to flag things that are not consistent with those standards, and that's the sort of evidence that we'd like to see.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
And one question for Geeta, like I say like civics design review, and if I understood correctly, when we are asking for design review, it's not like just pure design review and before the build phase. It's more like as you mentioned at one time, like it's good to have kind of demo so that like code can be incorporated on the review. So is that when we say design review, it's a mix of like not pure design. You need some kind of flavor of the code or build also. Is that correct?
Yeah, design review actually does refer to the design requirements, meaning your conformance to using modularity principles. So that actually will require us to look at code as well.
Okay, thank you.
And we want to, I mean, I just want to make sure that it's understood. The sooner the better. If we're engaged in the beginning, we can start looking at it. If there are any red flags, we can sort of point it out in the beginning. Nick, is there anything else to add?
No, I think that addresses the main point. It's important to look at code to be able to assess modularity. There are some situations, through the use of the SAS or COTS product where the code is kind of embedded in particular parts of the product where that's a little less relevant, but we'd still like to see broadly how the code is implemented.
And I know like mentioned like it's quite busy schedule from your team's review, but what is good time? Like, is it you mentioned 4 or 5 weeks before review to share documents? Because that way we can plan in advance, even if our module is not ready, but we can plan like, okay, to start the review, I need to engage the related team that much, like so many weeks before, so that I will know like by the time we end up, we can have review. Because if we start later, it may be further delay the all movement of product into next environment. So that's my question. Like, what is the good number of weeks like before that we should engage the review team before even like the product ready, so that we can plan accordingly?
Yeah, and there's no perfect answer to that. I just think the earlier, the better that you start having that conversation with your analyst. What I was saying with 3 to 5 or 5 weeks was, it was something that we thought would work, but we found that it might even be better if we got more documentation far more in advance. I think, and there's also the logistics of it, where if you say in 5, we need to make sure that our resources are available in 5 weeks and that we don't have 5 other reviews scheduled in 5 weeks from now. So the sooner we can kind of start talking about putting it on a schedule, the easier it is for you to prepare and for us to prepare. And you can talk to your analyst, because there will be certain documentation that you may be able to provide far in advance before you're even ready to have a review done for design requirements.
Geetha, can I add something?
Thank you.
Yes, please.
Oh, I was going to say, I think it's fine to negotiate the timing. Like Geetha's saying, I do agree that getting things early always helps. But we do understand, that you are an active, busy development schedule, and we don't want to, be disruptive. Our intent is to provide support and give you information early that you can use, not so late in the process that it's not helpful to you. But I do think, our intention is for us to negotiate that time frame with you. And so obviously if you have, a heavy schedule and something that, you're doing, you're not going to be able to accommodate a review, you can let us know. So it is a sort of negotiation of timing.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. One thing I would add is that high-level architecture diagrams are some of the most useful things for us to have early, so we can look for things that might cause problems down the line. Design documents, we recognize, especially in agile processes, that there's a continuous iterative process of design along with development. So we don't expect those to be fully fleshed out, but if you have some design documents too, that could be useful.
Thank you. These are good questions. Any other questions? Please feel free to ask them. There's no bad question. I see no other questions in the queue.
Okay. Well, I
Yeah,
suppose,
3:30.
yep, I suppose if there's no other questions, I'll just remind folks that questions can be submitted to the cwis.questions@acf.hhs.gov email address, or to your federal analyst if you still have questions after the webinar. And I believe we'll move on to the wrap up then. So thank you to all of our speakers today and to everyone that asked questions. And this webinar has been recorded and will be made available online. When it is complete and posted, a message will be sent announcing availability on the Children's Bureau website. The upcoming webinar for next month will be CSWAP and state profiles. So we hope to have you all there. Join us for that one. Thank you for attending today's webinar, and goodbye.